Greetings and salutations. I'm Fatal Prose, here for another live reading of Salvation, Black People in Love by Bell Hooks. This has been my first live reading series, and I think that, I've been experimenting with different methods of delivery. And so today I'm going to attempt to kind of integrate some of those, some of the things that have worked, some things that haven't, and do some more interaction with those that are in the comment section. So I'll read a paragraph and I'll check the comments. If you have a question or a comment, I'll share that strategically. But I'm going to try to stray away as much as possible from my opinion. So we'll have kind of a mini discussion, but the focus is on the reading and absorbing the material. And as we, once we get closer to completing the book, we'll have some more just straight discussions. So thank you so much for joining. Again, my name's Fatal Prose. If you are not following me, please make sure you follow me, on Fatal Prose and also Fatal Prose LLC. I'm sure you'll like the content. Again, this is chapter 5 of Black People in Love for Salvation by Bell Hooks. So leave your, comments and thoughts, and I'll be checking them periodically. Just to see where we are and touch base. So this is chapter 5, Moving Beyond Shame. When the philosopher Cornel West and I completed our book, Breaking Bread, Insurgent Black Intellectual Life, we gave many lectures together. In these talks, we often emphasized the importance of a love ethic. We talked about the importance of self-love. Again and again during question and answer periods, individuals in the audience would rise and ask us to say more about how we become self-loving, and ask us to say more about how for everyone in a society that is more concerned with profit than well-being. But it is even more difficult for Black folks, as we must constantly resist the negative perceptions of Blackness we are encouraged to embrace by the dominant culture. Peace. Thank you so much for joining. Within the context of white supremacy, Black people are often rewarded by racist white folks when we internalize racist thinking as a way of assimilating into the dominant culture. For example, a racially biased white employer who conveys stereotypical thinking about Black folks to a prospective Black employee will most likely select the person for the job who either agrees with his sentiments or does not challenge them. Throughout our history in this nation, every anti-racist struggle has stressed that decolonization is the only way Black people can either unlearn or resist learning the racist biases taught everyone in this society, beginning at birth. When a Black child is newly born, and those who stand around immediately evaluate the infant's value by his skin color, white supremacist thinking is taking place. The negative impact of the color caste system has already been discussed as a major impediment to healthy self-esteem among Black people. Collectively, decolonizing our minds means that every Black person would learn to stop judging others on the basis of skin color. Peace, love. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you joining and following me. Again, we're reading through chapter 5 of Salvation, Black People in Love, Moving Beyond Shame. I'll continue reading. Not all Black people passively accept white supremacist thinking. However, it impacts on all our lives. We must be ever vigilant so that we do not end up evaluating each other under a standard of measurement created by white supremacist thinking. Often, individual successful Black people work in predominantly white settings. In those environments, we may often be treated by white folks as though we are special, different from other Black people, whom they may perceive in stereotypical ways. Their behavior is aimed at breaking our sense of solidarity with other Black people. When this happens, individual Black folks often internalize the notion that they are superior to most of their Black peers. If such thinking prevails, they will often behave with the same racialized concept that racist white individuals deploy. This is, of course, a strategy of resubordination enacted to keep in place racial hierarchies that put white folks on top. Self-loving Black people worked to fend off attempts by white colleagues to pit them against other black people. Decolonization is often the necessary groundwork for the development of self-love. It offers us the tools to resist white supremacist thinking. The heart of decolonization is the recognition of equality among humans, coupled with the understanding that racial categories which negatively stigmatize blackness were created as a political tool of imperialist white domination. Most black people first confront white supremacy in the context of blackness, usually through discussion and/or responses to our appearance. Since the logic of white supremacy is that black is always bad and white is always good, in order to decolonize, such thinking has to be rejected and replaced by the logic of self-acceptance. Learning to be positive, to affirm ourselves in a way to cultivate self-love, to intervene on shaming that is racialized. Significantly, during the worst periods of racial apartheid in the United States, black people were more acutely aware of the need to vigilantly resist internalizing white supremacist thought. Everything was segregated in the world I grew up in. Most white Southerners expected black folks to behave in a manner indicating acceptance. Equality and love should be shown to everyone. Understood. That makes sense. Significantly, during the worst periods of racial apartheid in the United States, black people were more acutely aware of the need to vigilantly resist internalizing white supremacist thought. Everything was segregated in the world I grew up in. Most white Southerners expected black folks to behave in a manner indicating acceptance of subordination. In the presence of whites, we were expected to not speak until we were spoken to never question anything a white person said, to always allow them preferential treatment, to obey them. The list could go on and on. Decolonized black people recognized not only that these expectations were unjust, but that if we were all conformed to them, we would be both accepting and perpetuating the notion that it was our destiny to be second-class citizens. No black person could escape working within the constraints imposed on us by white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, but in all ways, progressive decolonized black people found the means to resist. Segregation means that in our all-black spaces, the institutions which govern our communities, church, school, social club, black folks could fully claim the subjectivity denied us by the larger white world. It was even possible for some clever individuals to live and prosper without really encountering the white power structure. As in the case of those escaped slaves, Maroons, renegades, who became insurgent resistors, creating their own oppositional freedom culture in hidden locations, powerful individuals in our all-black communities were able to offer us liberatory ways to think about blackness. When we were growing up, my mother and father were careful to create an environment in our home where racial stereotypes were always challenged. My mother came from a family where her mother could pass for white, and her father was very dark. Acutely sensitive to the conflicts color caste systems create, she was determined to raise her family in an environment where all would be regarded equally. This was important because our large family, like her family of origin, was made up of individuals with various shades and hues. Whenever anything appeared in the mass media that was negative and stereotypical about blackness, our mother would counter this information with constant affirmation of our worth and value as black people. I remember watching beauty pageants with Mama where all the contestants were white. She would say, "Look at them. They are nowhere near as beautiful or talented as you are." Or, if she approved of a white female, she urged me to use this example to better myself. Without knowing fancy political terms like decolonization, our mother intuitively understood that consciously working to instill positive self-esteem in black children was an utter necessity. Her values were reinforced by all the black institutions in our community. Ironically, at that time, everyone viewed the lack of black representation in mass media as a mark of racial injustice and white supremacist domination, but in retrospect, our self-esteem as black people was stronger then than it is now because we were not constantly bombarded by dehumanizing images of ourselves. When we watched shows like Tarzan or Amos and Andy that we enjoyed, we were ever aware that the images of blackness we saw on these programs were created by folks who, as Mama would say, did not like us. Consequently, these images had to be viewed with a critical eye. In my own family, this critical vigilance began to change as the fruits of the civil rights struggle became more apparent. Mama's last child would watch television alone with no adult voices teaching her a resisting gaze. By the end of the 60s, many black people felt they could sit back, relax, and exercise their full rights as citizens of this free nation. Once laws desegregated the country, new strategies had to be developed to keep black folks from equality, to keep black folks in their place. While emerging as less racist than it had once been, television became the new vehicle for racist propaganda. Black people could be represented in negative ways, but those who had wanted there to be jobs for black actors could be appeased. Nothing pushed the lessons of a white supremacist aesthetic more than television, a medium where even dark-haired white women had to become blondes in order to succeed. Ooh. Good morning, my brother. I hope you have the best day ever. Peace, love, and light. Peace to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the love. Yeah, we're reading through Bell Hooks, her book Salvation, Black People in Love. This is chapter 5, Moving Beyond Shame. Since television has primarily exploited stereotypical images of blackness, small children held captive by these screen images from birth on absorb the message that black is inferior, unworthy, dumb, evil, and criminal. While well-meaning black parents attempt to counteract the racism of the culture by affirming blackness in their homes, their efforts are easily undermined by mass media. When black children are allowed to watch television unsupervised, white supremacist attitudes are taught them even before they reach grade school. It was easier for black folks to create positive images of ourselves when we were not daily bombarded by negative screen images. This may explain why individual black folks came through the terrible period of racial apartheid with much better self-concepts than those of many young black people born when racial integration was more an accepted norm. Man, and just think about how, every child having a cell phone and being able to view things unsupervised is affecting them now. Wow. When there was no racial integration, black people were more vigilant about safeguarding the integrity of our lives in the midst of ongoing racial assault. Separate spaces also meant that racist biases in education systems could be countered by wise black teachers. Those who attended all black schools in the years before the militant black power struggle, institutions named for important black leaders, Crispus Attucks, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, were educated in a world where we were valued. While we studied the same lessons that were studied in the wider schools, our teachers added lessons in black history and culture. Since everyone in the school system was black, we had perfect role models. No one doubted our ability to learn, to excel academically. When our black schools were closed down and we were forced to integrate predominantly white schools situated far away from our neighborhoods, it caused tremendous psychological depression. Regarded as first-class citizens in our beloved schools, we were now bused to schools where we were treated as second-class citizens, where white teachers saw us as inferior, as savages, incapable of being their equals. When a black student excelled academically, they were regarded as the grand exception to the rule and treated by whites as a Negro pet. No psychologists or school counselors stood in the wings, nor do they stand there today, to help black children cope with the reality of moving from segregated schools where we had been valued to white schools where our teachers saw us only as a problem, where a great many of them actually hated us. Few black people had foreseen that equal access to educational institutions would not have a positive impact if within those newly integrated classrooms, black pupils would be taught by teachers perpetuating racist stereotypes who encourage us to feel shame and hatred for our race. Often, the most well-meaning white teachers still held racist attitudes, which they expressed openly. When my well-meaning, supportive white female drama teacher told me no black man would ever love me because I was too smart, she did not see herself as perpetuating a racist stereotype about black males. Once we left our all-black school, gifted black male students disappeared. They had always been visible in our all-black schools. At home, our parents talked about this unfair treatment of black males. Racist white folks simply did not want gifted white girls sitting next to black boys. No one attended to the psychological needs of those boys who had once been recognized as gifted, but were suddenly forced to go backwards. One of the smartest black boys in my peer group had a breakdown shortly after graduation. Yet for the most part, all these psychological traumas went unnoticed, and the psychological pain they created went untreated. When we showed signs of psychological disturbance in our homes, fear of attending school when we had once loved our classes, we were encouraged to accept the pain as part of the civil rights struggle. Our mission was to endure the indignities inflicted upon us to uplift the race. Still, this did not and does not mean that we were not wounded by the process. Peace, facts. Yeah, absolutely. Placing our education in the hands of unenlightened educators has always been dangerous and still is. Racist biases often shape both the information black students receive in schools and the manner in which they are treated when they seek empowerment by striving to excel academically. In their book, The Power of Soul, Darlene and Derek Hobson tell this story. When Derek was entering high school, he wanted to take college preparatory courses. Yet despite his previously good grades, a white guidance counselor discouraged him from taking on such a challenge. Instead, the counselor advised Derek that he do something with his hands so he wouldn't be frustrated, meaning that he pursue vocational or technical training rather than academics. As a loving advocate of her grandson, Derek's grandmother went to his school and intervened, helping him to forge ahead. African American oral history is full of such narratives. Currently, many white teachers may be kind to black students and still direct them away from striving for academic excellence. This kindness often has led parental caregivers and students to let down their guard and not be as vigilant in detecting racial biases when they emerge from well-meaning souls. A perfect example of misguided kindness happened recently when a young white Brooklyn school teacher, seemingly well-meaning, gave her predominantly black school children the book Nappy Hair to read. When progressive black parents shared with her that they did not see this book as positive, she ignored their critique. When mainstream media focused on the incident, no one ever talked about the issue of why the black parents felt it was inappropriate reading. Instead, they were depicted as terrorizing this well-meaning teacher. While her image and her story were repeated on national television and in popular magazines, the parents who protested her choice of this text were never shown, their viewpoints never heard. Though written by a well-educated black woman, the children's book, Nappy Hair, glorifies black self-hatred. While it accurately portrays the testing about our hair many black females endure, it presents this negative signifying as positive. Nappy Hair tells the story of a dark-skinned black girl who is constantly ridiculed and mocked by everyone because of her hair. The book makes painful shaming seem like fun. The tone is humorous and witty. There is no critique of racialized shaming and no alternative images. After all the... Excuse me. Give me one moment. Yeah, got you. Thank you for your patience. After all the negative assaults on her appearance, humorously rendered, the little girl jumps for joy at the end of the book. In actuality, black children who are shamed by someone mocking their appearance don't jump for joy. They are psychologically wounded. At times, the ways black children were and are wounded by racism intersect with other hurts inflicted by poverty, sexism, or other dysfunctional practices within the family. Children growing up in houses where substance abuse is the order of the day are always at risk. Throughout our history, as black people in the United States, there has been so much emphasis on racism as a force undermining black family life that little attention is given to all the other factors that may impinge upon the development of positive self-esteem. Attending to the grievous injustices and injuries of racism need not lead black folks to ignore all the other issues that disturb the psyche. Shaming has been a central component of racial assault, yet it is also central to all other dehumanizing practices. Within a culture of domination, shaming others is one way to assert coercive power and dominance. In traditional black folk cultures, some forms of humor promote forms of teasing that, when used inappropriately, become ways to humiliate and shame. For example, while there are positive dimensions to black expression, cultural practices like signifying, there is often a thin line between humor that is funny, witty, and satirical, the intent of which is to entertain, and humor that is used as a weapon to denigrate and shame. Children who are constantly shamed cannot build healthy self-esteem, and if this shaming continues into their young adulthood, it often leads them to significant breakdowns in mental health. I appreciate that. Yes, please do tap the screen if you would. We'd love to get as many people in to hear this as possible. This will be on my YouTube shortly thereafter for you to listen and rewatch. In the anthology Father Songs, Testimonies by African American Sons and Daughters, there are many stories about shaming. Brent Staples writes about his alcoholic father's habit of refusing at will to give money to his children, making them beg for it. At times, they could turn the tables on him, Staples recalls. When he didn't come through, the spot was heartbreakingly empty. The strategy then was to catch him in front of one of his brothers and shame him into it. Much cultural criticism, new and old, has been written about playing the dozen. Underlying this game of humorously trading insults about one's mother, it is usually played by men, is the threat of shame. Often matriarchal mothers use shaming as a way of disciplining children. Who has not been in a public setting where diverse children are running around joyously expressing themselves while a lone black child sits obediently, silently? Everyone may comment about how well behaved this child is. The fact that harsh authoritarian discipline may have produced this obedience is rarely noted. Usually, when a black mother publicly uses harsh, emotionally abusive verbal assaults to discipline a child, folks are aghast. But that same verbal practice may have been utilized at home to create the perfect behavior so many folks admire in the silent, obedient child who responds only when addressed by an authority figure. Inappropriate criticism is usually a dynamic used to shame. All such practices undermine our capacity to create and or sustain self-esteem. Ironically and sadly, in many black households where parents are adamantly anti-racist, regimes of discipline and punishment exist that mirror those utilized by white supremacists to subordinate black people. Some of those practices are physical abuse, verbal aggression, shaming, and withholding of recognition, which may include refusal to give praise or show affection. Verbal assault is so common in American families of all races as to be considered simply normal. Whether it has been normalized or not, we know that it has harmful consequences. In my book on Black women in self-recovery, Sisters of the Yam, I talked about how much we show love by the way we communicate with one another, that we need to speak warmly and tenderly to one another. Mean-spirited, aggressive speech wounds. Lots of mothers responded positively to this section of the book, testifying that it is all too easy to forget that harsh words can wound and break the spirit. It is often assumed, didn't this also lead to the Jim Crow law? No. What we're talking about right now is really how internalized racism manifests in Black family life, and that is not something that created Jim Crow. Jim Crow was created after the Reconstruction era, where Black people were able to get some significant temporary political and economic power in the South, but was quickly stripped away once kind of the U.S. Army left the South. And so Jim Crow laws developed after that as a way to reassert domination over Black people in a post-Reconstruction era. But thank you for asking your question. It is often assumed that it is only poor women and men who verbally assault their children. These are usually the parents we see publicly yelling and ranting. But loud, aggressive speech is not the only harmful speech. In materially privileged homes, children may be denigrated by parental caregivers who speak in calm monotones, but nevertheless are expressing hurtful, damaging sentiments. Silence can also be used to humiliate and shame. An adult parent who refuses to acknowledge a child when spoken to conveys the message that the child is not worthy of attention. Many men use withdrawing into silence to express their power over others. In Marlon Riggs' film Tongues United, a Black male voices these sentiments. Silence is our weapon. Silence is our shield. None of us can be self-loving if our presence is not recognized and valued. Kim says, listening to you read this book is so helpful. I wouldn't normally be able to read it. Happy to listen. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That gives me encouragement to continue this series. I try to do this every morning, and I'll continue to try to do this every morning. So thank you. Importantly, class plays no major role in determining whether or not we will be regarded by parents as and caregivers as worthy. Many Black folks from poor and working class backgrounds were given a foundation of love and recognition. This is crucial because many people choose to see poverty as a cause of child abuse whenever families are poor. There have always been loving families who lack material privilege. Children of all classes are abused. We need studies that document the strategies individuals use in homes lacking in material privilege to create care and respect in the midst of adversity. All too often, the assumption prevails that one cannot expect poor people to be caring. We hear again and again that these individuals are too preoccupied to deal with their emotional development. Such thinking, coming initially from the ruling class, has provided a convenient excuse that individuals who lack privilege can evoke to justify cruelty. While it is true that as drug addiction becomes more commonplace in the homes of the poor, it creates circumstances that destroy care, still substance abuse and its dysfunctions are the problem, not poverty. Since so many Black families are poor and working class, it is more important for us to acknowledge and show how lacks in material privilege need not lead to emotional lacks. I know of no recent work that looks at how poor and working class families create loving environments. White supremacist mainstream cultures has always been and will always be primarily concerned with highlighting what does not work in Black families. Progressive Black people and our allies in struggle must do the work of calling attention to diverse strategies used to create positive self-esteem in all Black families. The heart of self-love is healthy self-esteem. In his insightful book, Six Pillars of Self-Esteem, Nathaniel Brandon defines these pillars as the practice of living consciously, of self-acceptance, of self-responsibility, of self-assertiveness, of living purposefully, of personal integrity. Among these practices, personal integrity is one of the hardest since it requires commitment to truth-telling. Masking has been so central to Black folks' survival within white supremacist culture that we have not always recognized that the ways it harms self-esteem. Basically, masking invites us to create a false self, to misrepresent and dissimulate, that is, to take on whatever appearances are needed for a given situation. While masking was sometimes crucial to survival during the period of racial apartheid, those strategies destroy our capacity to be truth tellers when we adopt them in contemporary life. This cannot be stated often enough. Since patriarchal masculinity also encourages men to mask what they feel as a way of manipulating others, black males are especially at risk. They may be rewarded for being estranged from their feelings. Creating and maintaining personal integrity is especially hard in a culture of domination where lying is rewarded. Generally, in our nation, citizens are lying more and more. When high-ranking political leaders lie and are rewarded, it seems the message to all citizens that lying is the way to get ahead. Ooh, that burns. Often, black folks striving to succeed often feel bombarded and conflicted when expectations from black peers and family differ from those of the predominantly white world they work in. These individuals may construct a false self to get ahead in both these worlds. This produces inner conflict which undermines self-esteem. Importantly, the time has come for black people to courageously claim our right to personal integrity and refuse to don a false self for anyone. In the long run, individuals who self-betray by always masking and pretending suffer. Their mental and physical health is wrecked in the process. Shirley Chisholm remains one of the greatest black political leaders who always stood her ground when it came to the issue of personal integrity. That is why she titled her autobiography, Unbought and Unbossed. Politically, Dr. Jocelyn Elders had to cope with rejection for taking a courageous stand about sexuality, yet she has become a heroic example of personal integrity in a nation where individuals are willing to betray their beliefs to get ahead. This is powerful. Ooh, she's on fire. Okay. My mother's mother, Sarah Oldham, could not read or write. She taught us all that we should be truth tellers, understanding that our word is our bond. A hardworking woman, she would be seen by many as poor or indigent because she had no income beyond that received working on the land. Yet she was rich in spirit. She and our grandfather, Daddy Gus, her husband of more than 70 years, taught us the importance of living consciously, taking responsibility, and maintaining personal integrity. I emphasize this to state again that those who lack material privilege have as much access to spiritual and moral riches as anyone else. Currently, the poor are usually represented in mainstream culture as lacking in moral values. So we cannot state often enough that poverty is no indication of moral beliefs. Stigmatizing the poor is one of the ways the collective self-esteem of poor people is continually assaulted in this society. Whew, all right. Since masses of black people are among the poor, our collective self-esteem is at risk whenever anyone tries to publicly insist that the poor are inherently inclined toward dishonesty and fraudulent behavior. Widespread addiction in our society manifests itself in the worst ways in poor communities because those who lack funds usually exploit others to pay for their substance abuse. Therapeutic work shows clearly that all substance abusers, irrespective of their class background, are likely to be dishonest. Come on now. Addiction leads to lying. All addicts suffer a loss of self-esteem. Importantly, addiction must be effectively addressed in black communities to make way for a return to love. Self-love is first expressed by the way we tend to our bodies. Okay, let's go. We must work hard to love our black bodies in a white supremacist patriarchal culture. Loving our bodies does not mean simply liking the way we look. It means that we care for the well-being of those bodies by eating properly, exercising, and staying away from all addictions, including food. No mass media event has dramatized the extent to which food occupies a place of solace in black life, as well as the recent movie Soul Food. Oh boy. Not only is the family matriarch suffering from diabetes, a disease no one need die from, she neglects her health caring for others. The movie shows this without making any meaningful critique. After her death, the survivors do not change their diets, even though we saw the health problems and tragic consequences of bad diets. In Feeding the Hungry Heart, Gina Roth offers one of the most insightful accounts of the way we turn to food for solace to give us the comfort we may lack in our emotional relationships. Much of the work on eating disorders in our culture focuses solely on the predicament of white females, so there's little published research on African Americans and compulsive eating. Many life-threatening ailments and diseases that afflict Black people disproportionately to our numbers, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and kidney failure, to name just a few, can be avoided with sound preventative health care. This includes a healthy diet. Every African American can express self-esteem first and foremost by caring for his or her body. And mental health is as crucial as physical well-being. Indeed, they are interrelated. Again and again, I find Black folks reluctant to seek mental health care when they face emotional problems. Therapy is one available approach to healing. More and more individual Black people are seeking help for emotional pain with professionals. This is a gesture of healthy self-esteem. Historically, therapy has been viewed suspiciously by Black folks. Seeing therapy as suspect was rooted in the concrete reality that many mental health care practitioners held racist biases, especially white therapists. As greater racial awareness has entered therapeutic professions, more Black folks choose therapy. Man, I'm going to repeat that. Historically, therapy has been viewed suspiciously by Black folks. Seeing therapy as suspect was rooted in the concrete reality that many mental health care practitioners held racist biases, especially white therapists. Notice that it's not only white therapists. I'm sorry, I just have to interject that. As greater racial awareness has entered therapeutic professions, more Black folks choose therapy. Emotional healing is a process that can take place in any setting where we are genuinely cared for, where problems and difficulties can be talked about and solutions found. Folks without access to therapy can look to supportive friends, family members, and co-workers for help. When extreme racism could have made life unbearable for Black folks, communities sustained themselves through a process like consciousness raising. Talking together with one another about the impact of racism, Black people created a shared community of concern and support. Everyone could be stronger in the face of adversity, knowing they were not alone. When individuals experienced trauma from racist assault, they had support. Increasingly, individual Black people feel they must confront the pain of racism alone. Sadly, some Black people have been made to feel ashamed of experiencing emotional pain in response to racial assault by a culture that increasingly suggests anyone who names their suffering is trying to use victim status to get over. Hello. This is definitely a tactic deployed by individuals who hope to sustain a regime of white supremacist domination. When Black people and other non-white groups are told repeatedly that the problems they experience are their own fault, this delegitimization not only censors and silences, it promotes insanity. Sane people with healthy self-esteem respond to oppression and exploitation by both acknowledging their pain and resisting. Although needed now, in the future it will be all the more necessary for Black people and our allies in struggle to create text for mental care that validates all ways racist assault is traumatic while simultaneously creating programs for recovery. There should be an entire body of work, both serious scholarship and popular material, focusing on Black self-love. The absence of this literature is just another example of the way in which psychological trauma in the form of assaults on the self-esteem and souls of Black folks is not taken seriously in our society. There should be books that do nothing but accentuate the positive, sharing theories and strategies of decolonization that enable self-love. Initially, When I began to seriously explore written material about the primacy of love ethic in African American life, I was astonished that there was so little information. We need more. It is as simple as that. Without an organized, mass-based, progressive, anti-racist political movement, which we also need, it is all the more crucial that our homes become sites of resistance, where we create the oppositional spaces where we can be self-loving. These are the spaces where we have power. We can make home place the site where love, that is the foundation of all healthy self-esteem, exists. Woo! I just read to you national bestseller Salvation, Black People in Love by Bell Hooks. This is chapter 5. Chapter 5, which is titled Moving Beyond Shame. I will post this on my YouTube as soon as it's available. I know I have to post both chapter 4 and 5, and I will return, the morning, Monday morning, to read chapter 6. In the meantime, post content about any discussion that might be spurred in what you've heard. I will do the same, and if I can, I'll get on live again to open this up for discussion. Thank you so much for the likes and the love, and I wish you a great Sunday. Definitely make sure that you're safe, and I salute you in power and love. Peace.